Welcome to Rooting for You, a seasonal gardening podcast for non-experts. I'm Tess, and I know nothing.
And I'm Alyce, and I know some things.
Each week we'll chat about one gardening topic and then discuss the effort-reward payoff by asking, is the juice worth the squeeze? Just a heads up, there might be a bit of swearing in this episode. You've been warned. I love autumn. What I love most is the early days when the leaves are just starting to turn. The days are getting cooler and shorter, and I'm prematurely pulling out the knitted jumpers. I love figs, apples, pears, tomatoes. Also, Alyce tells me autumn is a fantastic time in the garden, and I'm busting to get into it. So Alyce, tell me, what is going to be keeping us busy in autumn?
Well, I think autumn's the most fun because there's the most produce coming out, the fun produce, the things like you mentioned, like figs that are only in season for a short amount of time during the year. Autumn is their peak. So I think people think about spring as being the fun time in the garden, but actually spring's a lot of work without a whole lot of reward. But when it comes to autumn, we've got beautiful veggies, beautiful fruit, and actually a whole host of flowers as well, like the dahlias are coming into the end of their season. So, and as you say, you've got the beautiful autumn leaves. So it's a beautiful time, it's a rewarding time, but of course, like every time in the garden, there is quite a bit to do because we've got that transition between our warm season crops and our cool season crops. So that's what we've got to focus on.
So starting off, we're changing the garden over. Summer's done, we're getting ready to, we're pulling the crops out? Is that where we're at?
Well, exactly, that's where we're at. And, you know, this may be basic for some people, but it's really important to understand that your summer crops, your heat-loving crops, so like your tomatoes, your pumpkins, your zucchinis, all those kind of things, they are not going to survive through winter, right? No matter how much love and attention you give them, they have done their dash. They have produced their stuff. We've got to get them out of the garden. So this is no failing on the gardener's behalf. This is simply the realities of the changing seasons. So yeah, we've got to get them out is the first thing. And look, often at this point in the garden, that's when people start seeing pests and diseases. The garden can start looking, as much as it's full and amazing, can start looking a bit shitty at the same time because things are overgrown. Powdery mildew is a real problem. And this is actually something that I saw in your garden, Tess.
The white spots
on the leaves. The white spots on the leaves. Now, look, I've never seen someone not get powdery mildew at some point. Like, it's so prevalent. It's a fungal disease on the leaves. And it's no problem in and of itself, but if it gets out of control, it stops the plant being able to photosynthesize, and then it can't, survive and produce fruit effectively, which is what we want. So in the end, it will see the end of our crop.
It's time to go.
It's time to go. So if you're seeing the powdery mildew but you're not ready for the crop to come out, which is exactly what we had at your place with the zucchinis, when you see those white spots on your leaves, and this is common for pumpkins, zucchinis, cucumbers, tomatoes, cut off those leaves. We want to get rid of that powdery mildew, and we also...
it spreads. It's
exactly
from leaf to leaf.
Totally. And lack of airflow makes it worse. So by cutting out some of those leaves, we actually give the plants a lot more airflow, because you'll see in autumn your tomatoes are so big, your pumpkins are so bushy, there isn't a lot of airflow, which allows these kind of pests to develop.
So it's not the end of your plant when you're seeing a little bit of the mildew, but it's
the start of the end.
We know it's time that it's winding up.
Exactly. So, and the reason I want to point this out is often people go nuts trying to treat their powdery mildew, and a lot of people say to do that, but frankly, my opinion is your crop's just about had it anyway, so let's just ignore the problem. Cut out a few early ones, but once it's spread and it's out of control, you're going to pull it out, so don't worry, don't stress. So once you've pulled it out, what on earth do you do with all these plants? You're going to want to compost them. Okay, so we will talk about composting in extensive detail in another episode. We will. So, we've pulled them out of the ground. We've got to get rid of them. Any fruit that is on the plants, you're probably going to have quite a big harvest at this point. So we talked about on a previous episode pulling your tomatoes out and how you're going to have a lot of green ones on the vine. Go back and listen to that. But this is probably the time you're also going to have a lot of pumpkins, a lot of chilies. So you might want to look at ways to preserve them. Pickling the chilies in like a vinegar solution is brilliant. Like your pickled jalapenos you have with your Mexican. That's excellent. Pumpkins will store for ages in a cellar if they're kept properly. And what I mean by properly is, you know how pumpkins have that like stem part that attached to the vine? You want to cut it off with as much stem as you can.
Oh, okay.
And that actually keeps it happy in its little pumpkin spot for months.
And then just a cool, dark place?
Exactly. Some people say you should wash it with bleach to make sure there's nothing on the skin that will cause it to rot prematurely. I never do that. I just keep an eye on them, you know?
Okay. And the bleach obviously won't affect the flesh inside?
Look, no, it definitely won't affect the flesh inside, but I will often roast it and eat the skin, so I don't really want the bleach on it, honestly. But if someone was finding that every time they store pumpkins, they're not storing very well, I would say
that could be a good idea.
Yeah, something you could wash it with for that reason. So you are going to have a big harvest at this point. You are going to need some way to keep it. I mean, there's a lot of things you can get in the freezer as well. I suppose it just depends on how successful your garden's been as to how much you're needing to preserve.
Look, I'll tell you what, my summer crop wasn't super successful, but I do have green tomatoes of various shades now turning into red sitting on the bench. So
exactly.
Where's the best spot for the any veggies, any tomatoes you pull out that might not have fully ripened on the plant? Where's the best spot to keep them?
I don't think it really matters.
Okay.
I think you just want them flat because sometimes you get a rotten one in there, and if you've got a big bowl of them, and I've done this before, if there's a rotten one at the bottom, you're not going to see it, and then it might start spoiling the ones around it. So I usually just lay them out on a big dish flat so I can see all of them, and if you do get the odd dodgy one, you can just pull it out before it causes too much controversy. But I don't think you need to like put it on a windowsill or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've got our crops out. We've harvested so many fun things and we're enjoying the fruits of our labour. What we've now got is effectively an empty patch. And this is what you've got at the moment, I believe. Yeah. Okay. So when we're thinking about growing a plant, we've grown a plant, say a tomato, because again, it's just such a great example. We've created all these tomatoes from effectively nothing. Where has all the nutrients come that is in that tomato? It's come from the soil. So every time you grow something, you're depleting the soil and transferring nutrients from the ground into the tomato, the pumpkin, the bok choy, right? So we need to make sure we look after that soil because you can't keep taking from it and not give back to it.
Yeah, so now's the perfect time to replenish the nutrients in the soil because everything's out.
Exactly. So you're usually going to do this twice a year. You're going to do it now and then you're going to do it in spring when you get your winter crops out and put your summer crops in again. Of course, there are many times throughout the seasons where you might be feeding or mulching or whatever, but I think when we do these changeovers, it's a really good time to just think, now the soil is bare, how can I kind of rebuild it a little bit? And you've got easy access to it as well. You're not trying to get, compost around plants or anything. You've got the empty garden. So give it a feed. The three easiest ways to do this are compost, which again we'll talk about making your own. You can buy it, of course, and some people will need to buy it because they won't be able to make enough of it for the size of their garden.
Okay.
But definitely start with what you've made yourself. The second thing is animal manures. Now we're not talking dog poo here. We are more talking chicken poo, horse poo, sheep, goat, alpaca. Obviously, I use my own chicken shit and my own alpaca shit, which is a brilliant manure. If you don't have your own animal that's going to be contributing to it, you can often find bags of, animal poo on the side of the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. You can buy it, from garden centres as like a pelletized form or something like that. I mean, it's a good option. It'll feed your soil. I have some concerns with it because you don't know how those animals lived, what they were fed, what the conditions were. So I think from an ethical
perspective, there's a hierarchy
perspective,
that's probably down the bottom.
Exactly. I mean, it's an ethical argument or an ethical consideration, but I think also it is actually a garden feed argument from my perspective because I do wonder, if those animals are fed antibiotics, what's in the manure that we're now putting on our garden. So look, if that's all you've got, brilliant. But if you can source it elsewhere, I would be more a fan of that.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about because, it makes sense that you want your soil to be as
organic
nutrient rich with all this good stuff in it, because that's when you're going to be growing your food from.
Exactly. And, as I said, the food literally comes from the soil. So it can only be as good as
The soil.
And if there is stuff in the soil, not always, but sometimes, like in the case of lead, that can then contribute, that can get in your food. So this is not going to be a massive issue for people, but I think when you can, try and get as close to the source and as close to nature as possible, and either by having your own animals or knowing someone that has their own animals that you can access is brilliant.
And definitely not too far out of the city, you do always see horse poo for sale for $5 a bag or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And often those are just people that have a couple of horses that have a nice life on their property, and great, utilize that. So, we've got the compost option, we've got the manure option, and then a lot of mulches people use contribute to the soil as well. So, like lucerne, mulches, those kind of things. So, and they have a whole host of purposes as far as moisture retention, suppression of weeds. I'm a massive fan of mulches and feeding the soil. We should do another episode on mulches, actually.
We will.
Yeah. So, in some way, rebuild that soil. Compost, manure, mulch.
So, the soil that's in there, that's drained of all of its wonderful nutrients, is that fine to stay in there and I just add on top of it? I mean, I'm going to get to the point that I'm going to be overflowing my garden bed shortly if I just keep adding to it.
Well, I actually find I find that you can kind of just keep adding. Like, I don't know if the plant takes some of it or how it goes.
So you don't need to throw out your old soil.
The only time I would say maybe is like if you're in a pot, if someone's like grown something in a pot for ages, they've never fed it, they haven't watered it, the soil just ends up like dust. In that case, I would probably empty out the soil in that pot.
It can't come back from it.
Can't come back from that. But anything that's in the ground, and I actually much prefer growing things in the ground, like what you've got at home, where the bottom of, even though it's a raised garden bed, the bottom is free for worms to come up and that kind of thing. I always prefer that type of gardening to pots. So I would say in a raised garden bed, there would be never a reason that you would be emptying out that soil. You can just keep building on it. Simple as that. And the one last thing I should mention is, of course, you can buy like fertilizer from a garden shop, like the little balls, little coloured balls, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I would say for the most part, if you're looking after your soil, you shouldn't need that. The one caveat I'll have for this is something like magnesium. If you've got a magnesium deficiency, your leaves on your plants will go yellow.
Oh, okay.
Especially citrus. So if you've got nice glossy green leaves, you don't have a magnesium deficiency, but it is a common one people see where their plants go yellow and they don't know why. It'll just be they don't have enough magnesium. In Australia, we really struggle to have enough magnesium in our soils generally, so it is a really common deficiency. That can be really easily remedied by buying a liquid magnesium fertilizer or something like that. So, that's a bit of a wrap up on fertilizers generally. Again, maybe needs another episode, but it is a good time to think about it when our soil is bare. So our soil is bare, we fed it, now we need to plant something for winter, is the next step of our kind of autumn to-do list. Things that I've got on my list that I like to grow for winter are kale, silver beet, broccoli, the head broccoli and the sprouting broccoli, lettuce, fennel, edible pansies, violas, calendula, another edible flower, parsley, coriander, and spring onions.
Yum.
Do you have anything on your winter planting list that I haven't covered?
Well, Brussels sprouts is something that I will add to that list because I love a Brussels sprout. And one thing I was going to ask about broccolini in particular, we, in my household, we could eat broccolini for every single dinner. It is a much loved vegetable.
Yeah, I'm a fan too.
If I want to have broccolini throughout the season, do I need to stagger the planting? So is that something I need to consider when I'm like, how do you plan your bed for the coming season? And Do you set it all out from the beginning to know what's going to go where and when you're going to put it in so you can stagger those veggies and have them rather than just a week of broccolini to have them a little bit more regularly than that?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. My first comment, which I think you're going to love, is growing broccolini, or what's considered to be sprouting broccoli, where it doesn't have those tight heads, it has those like little shoots with little heads, is so much easier than growing the tight head variety.
Brilliant.
So
I love that.
Good. Yeah, so do I. So I never grow the tight head variety, actually. I only grow the sprouting broccoli. So one, I like it better too. I find it much more tender and tasty, easier to use because the stems are a lot more palatable, and it's so much easier. The other thing about sprouting broccoli, which I really like, which you are going to really like, is that when you grow it, say you grow 10 plants at once, plant them all the same day, as you say there's succession planting is a factor. But the thing with the sprouting broccoli is it's going to send up a middle head that you're going to harvest first, and that might be your first week of sprouting broccoli. And then it's actually going to send up all these side shoots. So even if you plant, and then you can harvest them as they come up, and then more side shoots are going to come up. So with something like sprouting broccoli, you are going to get that natural succession to your harvest, which you're right is so important, because if you planted 10 heading broccolis on the same day, you're then going to have 1 week of more broccoli than you know what to do with.
Broccoli soup every night of the week.
Just broccoli breakfast, lunch, dinner and dessert, just all the broccoli. So there are some plants that naturally tend themselves towards that succession of being able to be harvested over a few weeks, maybe 6 weeks. Some crops don't, and those ones you do want to plant every couple of weeks.
Yeah, so that's something that really, I don't have a huge amount of space in my suburban backyard, so that's something definitely for me to consider, that if I want to continue to eat what I grow and not eat it all in 1 week, that a succession plant might be better suited for my more limited space.
Yeah. And look, honestly, I have a huge amount of space and I almost never nail the succession planting. Like, I am not out there planting my broccoli every 2 weeks. Like, I am going to do, 12 plants at one time and that's it. So I tend to favour crops that will give me that succession. Or something like a beetroot, for example. You plant heaps of beetroot, they're all going to be ready at the same day, but they sit really happily in the soil until you want them.
Oh, that's good.
So something like that is really handy, even if it's kind of finished at the same time, if it can sit there. Because some things, once they're ripe, they need to be picked straight away. They can't just hang out on the plant indefinitely. So focusing on those crops are really good. Something like radish, which I didn't mention, is a brilliant one for winter, but they are one of those things that when they're ready, they're kind of ready. Otherwise, they keep going too big. And I often end up with like a week of a billion radishes that I can't eat all of them. And they really should be succession planted. The other question you mentioned was, how do you plan this? So there are a lot of apps, websites, software programs you can actually use to like set out your garden to manage the succession, to manage what goes where, to manage crop rotation. I have really romanticized notions of using this stuff, and I used to plan my garden out within an inch of its life. And then, life just sets in and something's ready and you've got a seedling of something that needs to go in, and that ends up being whacked there and it never goes to plan.
Yes, you've got a free weekend, so that's when you're doing all your planting.
Exactly. And, you've pulled your tomatoes out, so now there's free space there. But, you're never sure when that crop's going to be done and when the next one's going to want to come in. So I think having a plan is a really good idea, but, don't
it's not
worry
really how life is.
No.
Unless you're the wonderful kind of person that can do that.
Exactly. But, the other thing is with the garden is, and after doing this for a few years and recording some stuff, this does my head in, but it's the reality of it, is, 1 year it might get to the first week of April and all my tomatoes are cactus, it's way too cold for them, they need to come out, right? Other years it might be 3 weeks into April and my tomatoes are still going strong. So you might have a plan and an idea of what it's going to be, but you don't know what the weather's going to be every year. So that really changes things. But I think thinking about crops that, as you say, have that succession element, thinking about things you eat a lot and thinking about things that are easier to grow, like the sprouting broccoli versus the heading broccoli, will set you up for success going into the cooler months. And, you know, there are a lot of crops like your brassicas, cabbages, kales, Brussels sprouts. These you can grow in the warmer months, but they just get hammered by cabbage butterflies.
Oh,
so,
okay.
You know,
Now's
and again,
the time for them.
so now's the time. The cabbage, it's too cold for the cabbage butterfly. So you can grow these things beautifully without the pest. And, you know, you can try and grow them in the summer and invest a lot of money and time and heartache in using chemicals, but, you know, we can just be a bit smarter and grow them at a different time of year and we don't have those issues. The one other thing I will say about autumn is that's when so much of the fruit that we love actually comes into peak season. We mentioned some of them at the start, but some other ones are quinces, persimmons, figs, autumn fruiting raspberries, these kind of things. So if you've got these trees in, you are just going to be
having an absolute field day.
Pig in shit in autumn, pig in shit. So, you know, harvest them, love them, enjoy it, because it is the only time of year you're going to get those fruits. If we've inspired you to plant these things, autumn is not the time for it. You put all these kind of autumn fruiting deciduous trees in winter. So we'll talk about that in a different episode. But if you want to grow some of that autumn fruiting produce, wait till winter and buy bare-rooted trees.
So it's a slow burn on those ones.
It is a slow burn.
But
and
worth it.
Worth it. The juice is worth the squeeze, they say, Tess.
So the big question, is the juice worth the squeeze? This is where we look at the effort-reward ratio of today's topic. The categories are superstar, high effort, high reward. Completing this will make you feel like an absolute rock star. Best on ground, low effort, high reward. Quick wins and fill-ins, low effort, low reward. And finally, the wooden spoon, high effort, but not much reward. So, Alyce, autumn. It's a bit of a hard topic for is the juice worth the squeeze, but where does autumn fit? Why do we say, where does putting nutrients back in your garden sit on the squeezy juice matrix?
The squeezy juice matrix. Look, I think rebuilding your soil isn't a huge job, but the rewards are massive, because if you have crap soil, you're going to have crap plants. You know, soil that isn't strong is going to create plants that aren't strong and be way more susceptible to pests and disease. So by investing some time, and not a lot, frankly, in rebuilding, that's going to actually save you time over your entire cold season crop. So I'm going to say best on ground.
For mine, I'm putting it somewhere between best on ground and superstar, because there's a few things that it seems like a particularly dirty job.
I mean, yes. Well,
But we're sold that the reward is high. So it's definitely one of those categories. And then it's either a best on ground or it's a superstar, depending how much you like getting in there and getting amongst the dirt and the mulch and the really getting your hands dirty on this one.
I actually think the getting your hands dirty part isn't so much rebuilding the soil, it's actually getting your crops out.
Pulling everything out.
And look, you haven't quite experienced this with your mini tomatoes, but if when you've got some monster plants and some monster pumpkin vines, like
big pumpkin,
some big vines, actually getting the plants out of the ground and getting them into a form that can be disposed of, like cutting them down. Now that is a bit of a prick of a job.
Hard work.
I'd say that is the harder of the two jobs. The other thing I'll say with the squeezy juice here, talking about autumn as a whole, is there are a lot of people who I call summer warriors in the garden. They'll grow the summer crops and then often they'll leave the patch bare over winter. Because the summer crops are the sexy ones, they're the fun ones. You know, people want to be in the garden, that kind of thing. So I get it. And look, you know, if you're going to grow in summer and that's it, a whole host better than not growing at all. But I do think with a bit of careful planning and a bit of thought about what you're going to eat in winter and what's easy to grow in winter, it is worth getting in, even if it's just radishes and lettuces, like some really easy crops that just have something. Because the thing is with gardening also, it's always better to have something in the soil than nothing.
Yeah, okay. That's a really good point. And particularly around the stuff that you can grow it in summer, but you can also grow it in winter. So that's a really good thought in terms of thinking about what your crop is going to be and what your garden beds are going to look like. Because then maybe you can say, well, I am interested in sprouting broccoli. Yes, I could do it in summer, but I could also do it in winter and then have more room for my tomatoes in summer.
Exactly. So, yeah, I'm going to say rebuilding soil, very important, and winter planting, autumn planting generally is not the sexiest, but definitely valuable.
Amazing. Rooting For You is hosted by Alyce and Tess. You can find us on Instagram @rootingforyoupod or email rootingforyou@alycealexandra.com.